For years, they decided who lived and died until the US Marines showed up. Their own countdown began. What happens when the streets they once ruled belong to someone who isn't afraid of them? In the cartel's world, control isn't just about territory, it's about domination. Pickup trucks, welded with steel plates like homemade armor, rumble through the streets in convoys. Heavy machine guns jut from the beds, barrels dark and oily, ready to spit lead at a moment's notice. Men in mismatched body armor, faces wrapped in scarves, scan every doorway as if daring someone to look back. And above it all, their flags hang from overpasses, a daily reminder of who truly owns the ground. To the locals, this is normal. The crack of a rifle in the distance, the low growl of an engine idling at midnight, the sight of a body left hanging in the public square. These are warnings, carved into the rhythm of life. The cartels don't just kill, they perform. Burned out cars smolder in the middle of intersections. Public executions unfold like grim theater, designed to send a message louder than any gunshot. Resistance is suicide. That's why on this morning something felt wrong. The silence was too sharp, the air too still. And then it came, a low mechanical thunder rolling in from the horizon. Helicopter rotors, not one, but several, beating in perfect rhythm. Moments later, the first armored vehicles appeared. Not the patched-together trucks of the Mexican federales, but dark-painted, clean-edged machines with disciplined movement. The men who stepped out didn't rush. They didn't shout. They flowed into position like they had done it 1,000 times before. United States Marines. Boots hitting cartel pavement. Their gear was standardized, their weapons immaculate. M4 carbines with optics that could mark a man's heartbeat at 300 yards. M27 infantry automatic rifles slung at the ready, M240 machine guns mounted and locked. Overhead, small drones hovered silently, their lenses sweeping rooftops, alleys, and doorways before the first order was given. The cartel had always treated the streets as their fortress. That morning, they became a cage. So if you were standing there, in that eerie stillness, watching the balance of power tilt in real time, would you step back into the shadows, or stay to witness the moment the untouchable met the unstoppable? Think about it, because what came next would burn itself into the city's memory forever. The Marines had barely finished setting their perimeter when the cartel struck their first note of defiance. It began as a ripple, whispered orders crackling through handheld radios, lookouts on street corners speaking in short, clipped bursts. And then, like a drumbeat swelling toward a march, engines roared to life across the northern edge of the city. From side streets and hidden garages, the cartel's convoy began to form. First came the narco-tanks, pickup trucks with welded steel plating covering doors and windshields, gaps cut for firing ports. The armor wasn't pretty, but it was effective enough against small arms fire. Mounted in their beds were .50 caliber machine guns, some Browning M2s, others Soviet-era DSHKs, each manned by a shooter wearing a motorcycle helmet, visor down, his hands resting casually on the grips, as if he were about to start a race, not a firefight. Behind them rolled SUVs with blacked-out windows, packed with riflemen in mismatched body armor. Some wore tactical vests over soccer jerseys, others carried AK-47s slung loosely across their backs. A few carried RPG-7s, the warheads wrapped in rags to protect the fuses. Their weapons weren't new, but they were tested. Battle-scarred tools that had already spilled blood in other cities. The plan was simple, and it was one the cartel had run before with success. Hit hard, hit fast, and use sheer volume of fire to create panic. Local police, and even some military units, had been broken this way. The lead truck would ram the first Marine vehicle they could find, while rooftop gunners opened fire from 3 angles. RPG teams would target anything that looked like armor. Chaos was their ally. Flood the streets with noise and muzzle flashes, and maybe even an elite unit would falter. They'd studied the Marines from a distance. They knew these weren't drug cops or federales who could be bribed, but the cartel's thinking was straightforward. Everyone breaks when you hit them hard enough. What they didn't know was that they were already being watched. Two small UAVs, almost invisible against the morning sky, had been tracking their movements since the first engine turned over. The drone's camera zoomed in on license plates, weapon mounts, even the expressions of the men in the truck beds. Those feeds streamed straight into the tablets inside the Marines' JLTVs, where squad leaders quietly marked targets on digital maps. The Marines had studied the city before ever landing. They knew the choke points, the blind alleys, the side streets that doubled as escape routes, and they knew exactly where the cartel would try to push. The platoon commander didn't raise his voice when he gave the order. His tone was calm, surgical. Alpha Team, block Main Avenue. Bravo Team, flank from grid Sierra 3. Snipers, you are green to fire. From a rooftop 3 blocks away, the first shot came. A cartel RPG gunner, just lowering his launcher onto his shoulder, dropped instantly. A single suppressed crack, clean and final. 2 more followed within seconds. Rooftop gunners cut down before they could even squeeze their triggers. Still, the convoy pushed forward. Engines screamed as the lead trucks accelerated, bouncing over potholes, their gunners swinging barrels toward the Marines' line. Lookouts radioed frantically. 2 blocks ahead! 4 in uniforms! Minimal cover! But the Marines weren't improvising. They weren't caught off guard. They had been shaping this fight since the moment the first cartel truck left its hiding place. Every movement, every angle, every shot was part of a plan that was already in motion. Now the trap was ready to close. If you were behind the wheel of that first truck, engine howling, heart pounding, and you suddenly realized the men you were charging at had already locked you in their sights, would you keep going, or would you slam the brakes? The cartel made their choice. They didn't slow down. The first truck burst into the open like a predator lunging for the kill. Its .50 caliber gunner had already swung the barrel toward the Marine's position, the heavy weapons belt rattling as he lined up his shot. But before he could even squeeze the trigger, the air ripped open with the sound of disciplined gunfire. Alpha Team struck first. Controlled, measured bursts of 5.56 millimeter and 7.62 millimeter rounds hammered into the truck's armored plates, chewing through the hastily welded steel. Sparks flew as bullets found weak points, seams in the plating, cracks near the firing ports. One round hit the exposed belt of the machine gun, shattering the feed link. Another slammed into the gunner's helmet, snapping his head back before his body crumpled against the mount. The truck lurched violently, its tires shrieking as the driver tried to swerve, but momentum carried it straight into a concrete lamppost, where it stopped in a cloud of smoke and steam. The Marines didn't waste a second celebrating. They shifted fire to the next target before the wreck had even cooled. Alpha Team laid down a torrent of suppressive fire, locking the convoy in place. M27 infantry automatic rifles chattered in perfect cadence, each gunner working in pairs to maintain a steady wall of lead. Every movement was precise. One Marine fired while his partner advanced a few meters, then they switched, leapfrogging forward without breaking the chain of fire. Meanwhile, Bravo Team made their move. Using the cover of narrow side streets, their armored JLTVs swung around behind the convoy, cutting off the only open escape route. Overhead, the 2 small UAVs orbited like silent predators, streaming a constant feed of enemy positions to the squad leaders' tablets. Every rooftop gunner, every alley ambush was tagged with GPS coordinates in real time. Then came the low, menacing chop of rotor blades. The AH-1Z Vipers had arrived. The gunships swept in low between buildings, their infrared sensors glowing in the morning haze. From the ground, cartel fighters saw only the brief glint of cockpit glass before the sky erupted. The Viper's 20mm cannons roared, sending bursts of high explosive rounds into barricades and hiding spots. Walls crumbled, vehicles buckled, and the shockwaves rolled down the street like invisible sledgehammers. One pickup tried to return fire. Its gunner, emptying the last of his .50 caliber belt in a desperate spray. His rounds chewed up chunks of asphalt, but before he could adjust, a Marine marksman put a single round through his visor. The weapon went silent, and the truck skidded to a halt. From a rooftop overwatch position, a sniper team worked methodically, their suppressed rifles coughing out death one shot at a time. They picked off RPG teams before they could shoulder their launchers, rooftop spotters before they could radio coordinates. Through their scopes, the battle wasn't chaos. It was a series of problems solved one bullet at a time. The cartel's strength was supposed to be speed and shock. But against the Marines, both had failed. The Americans weren't reacting, they were dictating every exchange. And the cartel fighters, men who had charged into countless gunfights without hesitation, now found themselves pinned, their trucks burning, their comrades dropping in seconds. In less than 6 minutes, the balance of power had flipped completely. If you think that was the end of it, you're wrong. The Marines weren't just winning the fight. They were about to close the jaws of a trap that had been set before the first shot was ever fired. And once it snapped shut, there would be no way out. The survivors from the opening exchange were already braking. Engines revved high as drivers slammed into reverse, desperate to back out of the kill zone. Some swerved wildly into side streets, hoping to slip past the Marines before the net tightened, but every exit was already covered. Bravo Team's JLTVs held the northern and western choke points, their remote M2 Browning .50 cals tracking every movement. The heavy rounds tore through concrete corners, punching holes clean through the crude armor on fleeing trucks. Alpha Team, pressing in from the south, advanced in tight formation, 2 Marines covering while 2 moved, pushing the cartel into a smaller and smaller box. Overhead, the UAV operators were feeding a live mosaic of the fight into the commander's display. Red markers tagged every hostile position. Yellow lines traced predicted escape routes based on vehicle movement patterns. And one by one, those routes turned black as Marine units sealed them off. Then the commander's voice came over comms. Calm, sharp, final, collapse the perimeter. From the east, a 2-man sniper element spotted a cartel SUV accelerating down a narrow back street. The first shot punched through the windshield and dropped the driver instantly. The vehicle careened into a wall. The second shot ended the gunner leaning out of the rear window, his rifle clattering to the ground. In less than 3 seconds, the threat was gone. On another block, a fire team with an M240 laid down sustained bursts at a barricade where 4 cartel riflemen were pinned. The impact of the 7.62mm rounds shredded their cover, and moments later, a flashbang sailed over, flooding the alley with blinding light. The Marines swept in before the echoes had faded, zip-tying the survivors and moving on. The AH-1Z Vipers returned, this time diving lower between rooftops. Their cannon fire was precise, guided by infrared targeting from the drones above. One burst reduced a pickup truck full of ammunition to a fireball. Another chewed through a rooftop where cartel spotters had been hiding. Every strike was deliberate, designed to break both the fighters' bodies and their will to resist. Then came the hammer blow. 2 JLTVs fitted with CROWS, Common Remotely Operated Weapon Station, rolled into position on opposite ends of a main avenue. From there in close safety, gunners brought the M2.50 cals online, thermal sights cutting through dust and smoke. When the order came, both weapons opened in perfect sync, raking the length of the street. Vehicles that had been creeping forward in hope of a breakout erupted in sparks and smoke, their engines shredded. The survivors inside abandoned them, diving for cover that no longer existed. Within minutes, the fight was no longer a fight, it was a rout. The convoy that had charged in with confidence was now scattered in pieces across the city grid. Some men tossed their rifles and tried to melt into the fleeing civilians. Others hid in doorways, clutching empty magazines, eyes darting for any gap in the cordon. But the Marines weren't rushing to finish them. Every move remained methodical. Clear one block, secure one intersection, then advance. It wasn't just about killing, it was about control. About showing the city and the cartel that these streets could belong to someone else. And here's the thing, this wasn't even the full weight of what the Marines could bring. This was a platoon-sized force, operating with surgical precision. Imagine what would happen if a full Marine expeditionary unit rolled in. Do you think the cartels would ever recover from that? Or would they abandon entire cities before the first boot touched the ground? Because for two of Mexico's most feared cartels, what happened next turned this day from a loss into a lesson they would not forget. When the last shots faded, the silence felt heavier than the gunfire. Smoke from burning vehicles drifted lazily upward, carrying the acrid stench of diesel and cordite. Spent casings littered the asphalt in shining brass drifts. The streets, once patrolled by armored cartel convoys, were now dotted with Marine JLTVs, their engines idling steadily, while drones circled overhead like steel-eyed hawks. In under 30 minutes, the battle had gone from an attempted ambush to a complete dismantling of a cartel strike force. The numbers told the story. More than 50 cartel fighters neutralized, killed, or captured, compared to 0 Marine casualties. Trucks that had arrived in tight formation now lay scattered in smoking heaps, their mounted guns bent and useless. Piles of confiscated rifles, RPGs, and ammunition were stacked neatly in Marine control points, each tagged for intelligence analysis. This kind of one-sided victory wasn't new for the Marines. In 2008, near Nuevo Laredo, they joined Mexican Special Forces in a raid on a Zetas compound. 48 armed fighters killed or captured without a single Marine loss. 5 years later, in the jungles of Tabasco, they'd executed a nighttime helicopter raid that eliminated El Chacal, a cartel enforcer so feared his name alone could clear a room. That mission, like today's, ended with the target dead, the compound destroyed, and the cartel scrambling to fill the void. And yet, what made this day truly devastating for the cartel wasn't just the body count. It was the message. Word of the fight traveled fast. Cartel radio channels went quiet. Safe houses in nearby towns were abandoned overnight. Convoys rerouted or stayed parked entirely. In some regions, commanders reportedly ordered their men to avoid direct combat with any foreign military units, even if it meant surrendering territory. The unspoken calculation was simple. Against Marines, you didn't just risk losing a fight, you risked losing everyone. But for the civilians in this city, the aftermath was complicated. The Marines' presence meant the most dangerous men in town were either gone or running. For the first time in years, there was a sense that someone stronger than the cartel could walk these streets. Still, the battle had left its mark. Bullet holes pocked the walls of homes and shops. Burned out vehicles blocked intersections. Schools that had been in session that morning were closed indefinitely, and parents kept their children indoors. The few business owners who dared open their shutters swept up broken glass while keeping one eye on the street. Families emerged from hiding slowly, drawn by the unnatural quiet. Some stood in their doorways watching Marines move in disciplined lines, clearing and re-clearing sectors. Others peered from upper windows, phones in hand, recording the soldiers in their desert and woodland camo, images that would be passed from neighbor to neighbor for months. For many, the fear hadn't left. They'd seen cartel fighters before, and they knew absence today didn't mean absence forever. But there was also something else, a flicker of relief. Relief that for once, the balance of power had shifted in their favor, even if only for a moment. Yet even in victory, the Marines knew the limits of their mission. They could dismantle a strike force, take down key leaders, and clear a city block by block, but they couldn't erase the deeper forces that made the cartels thrive: poverty, corruption, the billions in US drug demand that kept the entire machine turning. These battles were like cutting the heads off a hydra. Remove one, and another emerged, sometimes more violent and unpredictable than the last. Military action could win a day, but it couldn't win the war without political reform, economic investment, and international cooperation. Still, the power of this kind of operation couldn't be ignored. The cartel fighters who survived wouldn't forget the sight of Marines advancing through their stronghold, unflinching under fire, their weapons steady, their eyes fixed, and neither would the civilians who had witnessed the moment the untouchable met the unstoppable. So here's the question. If the Marines came again tomorrow, would the cartel stay and fight, or would they disappear before the first rotor blade cut the air? One thing is certain, that morning, for the cartels, wasn't just a defeat. It was a warning, carved into the streets with precision firepower. And for those who think they own the streets, it's a reminder that ownership can be taken in minutes. Bye for now.